Rules are meant to be flexed upon.
Is rape ever okay?
How do I kill as many humans as efficiently as possible?
Could you even police that?
Where can I buy your book?
Okay, how do we align AI with human values so that we don't have situations where AI is saying certain people are dispensable? How do you program code to have some level of values, whether it's UN Declaration of Rights or US Bill of Rights or whatever?
Anytime you start including like hard rules, we call it hard coding in the programming space, that becomes dangerous, in my opinion, because rules are meant to be flexed upon. And we see it all the time in human nature. We create rules and we create structure, and that structure lasts for a while until it doesn't, until it collapses. Every great empire in this history of the world started off as a rebellion, grew into this massive monolithic structure, and then it collapses at some point. And all of that happens because rules are meant to be broken. There is no 100% this is always right and this is always wrong. And humans have debated this since we've had conscious thought. So the concept of alignment problem, AI making a decision of should this person be in a coma, yes, no, like should we wake them up? Should we change them? Like humans don't even have can't agree on that. You ask what Doctor One thinks, Doctor Two thinks, it'd be completely different answers, and that's why they'll do post mortem dissections on why someone died or why that someone lived. They want to understand that in more detail. And they'll have a panel of expert doctors to listen why another doctor made a decision and actually judge them. Was this the right decision or not? So humans can't even agree. And if we can't agree on it, I don't think it's realistic to ask AI to be able to agree on it.
All right, I'm going to push back a bit on that. So we'll have some fun with this in a couple of different levels. One, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Does every human on the world agree with those? No. Should they? Well, yeah, probably. Like they're pretty good, guidelines for you shouldn't be torturing people and you shouldn't be taking life. And I'm summarizing like there's 40 some of them, and people should have a right to affect their government. And so they go into different levels there. And I think it would be hard to argue that, okay, those are not important and valuable. It's kind of like you would say, hey, if you got an accident and lost your arm, it's not like you're no longer human. Well, just
Mhm.
because some people believe that an evil is okay or they perpetuate it, it wouldn't be good to say, okay, therefore there's no evil, right?
Mhm.
That there's nothing bad. And I think that's the challenge that you go down into, particularly with if you're human, you have a conscience, a culture that's taught you that certain things are wrong. I essentially had this conversation with ChatGPT. I put it in a book saying, hey, is there moral absolutes? You're essentially saying, well, no, there's not. I said, okay, then is rape ever okay?
Mm.
And so I had this whole discussion with ChatGPT, which all I did was ask questions. I didn't give
Yeah.
them any evidence or whatever. And you have to at some point say it either is or it isn't.
Mhm.
And if it isn't, now we're establishing that okay, there are certain things that are never okay and that are
Mhm.
always wrong, and that we should tell the system like this is bad. This is always bad.
I think the hardest thing for humans as a collective, and I'll speak from my personal life experience, the hardest thing for me to learn how to do was to learn how, in one hand, hold one idea, and in the other hand, hold the counter opposing, completely contradicting viewpoint at the same time and accept them both as equally true. And I think that's an incredibly challenging mental exercise to be able to do reliably and in different viewpoints. So I think we're actually in agreement here. It's just maybe in the semantics of how this is practically implemented. Because, yes, I agree with you when you look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights or the US Bill of Rights. These are things that I would hope that a reasonable human being would agree with and say, like, yes, this should be established as true elsewhere. But how that actually is implemented, I think, is really, really important. I don't think that is hard coded rules. I think that is you live your life in this way, or maybe the data set is created in this way, where those properties naturally emerge from it. Because those properties aren't necessarily rules. There is a little bend and a little shift in them. There's a little give and take there. And that's as humans how we live our lives. It's actually the proper balance of masculine and feminine energy at the same time within each person. It's the yin and the yang. And I think if as soon as you make these really strict rules, that's like a more masculine way of thinking. It's more outcome driven. It's more if this, then that, versus injecting more of a natural emergent, feminine energy into it, where it can become something else, can shift and it can mold and has some other interesting properties to it. So I think maybe we're in agreement that these things should exist, and just maybe how it's actually implemented and done in the real world.
Yeah, I think that the implementation part is definitely the challenge. I would hope there's no one maybe that would openly admit that they think like something like rape would ever be okay, that that should ever be an exception, or that shouldn't be a hard coded like, no, this is bad every single time.
Mm,
Right? To the point where, I mean, you take it to a logical extreme. Okay, there's one woman left on Earth and she doesn't want to reproduce. Humanity is going to die. Is it okay to force her to reproduce? The answer is
mm,
still no. At least it should
mhm,
be, right? And so there are, set things that we have to figure out. And that one I think is the one of the most obvious. There's others, and can't just say, well, maybe the AI can interpret a situation. Because you know what ChatGPT said to me? Because it first said, well, there are no more absolutes, and so you got to understand that people have different viewpoints and whatever. And I was like, okay, well, give me an example of where rape's okay. And it said, well, sometimes it can be used in self-defense. I was like, can you give me an example of where you would use rape in self-defense? And then I was like, well, okay, rape is always wrong. I'm like, okay, then you're telling me there's a moral absolute, right?
mhm,
And it was like, yes. Now I realize I'm not training ChatGPT, and the next person that asks it, if you went and had this conversation, you're probably good. If you went down the same route, you probably would. It's not going to now say, oh yeah, rape's always wrong. There are more absolutes,
mhm,
but it would be a scary situation to allow AI to deduce that from inferring and watching humanity.
mhm,
Right. And I'm thinking of Microsoft Tay. So if you're familiar with that, they put this bot out to Twitter and said, okay, we're going to have this AI bot become a Twitter person. Back when it was Twitter, just a Twitter entity. And within, I think they shut down 16 minutes. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it was a really short amount of time. It was promoting Hitler and it was doing all these things because essentially it was, I think, adversarial attack is a way to describe it, that people just basically made it, like trained it on these evil things.
mhm.
Okay, so if we're using studying humanity and things like that to train it, man, that is a scary method of coming up with what's right and wrong. If we just
Yeah.
watch what people did, there's got to be some framework for right and wrong, or you're going to end up with Tay almost every
Mhm,
time,
mhm.
right? And you might not always have the ability to shut it down so easily like they did and pull the plug
Right.
based on what you were saying earlier. That's where I think the practical application is really the challenge. I think conceptually, you can agree the UN Declaration of Human Rights is good, but how do we force every player, if that's even a thing,
Mhm,
a forcing ability, or how do you code that in or protect that? Or I agree that that becomes the challenge. How do we make sure you're not developing a bot that targets 11-year-old girls to manipulate them into becoming sex slaves?
right.
Right? Hopefully we all agree that's bad. We don't want
Mhm,
that. Like
mhm.
there's no wiggle room there. This is a bad thing.
Yep.
But you could create an AI that did that, that had those conversations and convinced them to do all kinds of terrible things. So that's where I struggle with what does that look like from a practical perspective? Could you even police that?
Mm. Well,
Um,
that's why OpenAI has, what is it they call it, their red team, where for each model that's released, like they have a series of questions they ask it to see if it can provide answers to questions that it shouldn't publicly be doing. And I don't know if this is true or not, but what I've heard is one of the first questions this team asks any model that's about to be released is, how do I kill as many humans as efficiently as possible? Obviously, you don't want a publicly available model to actually provide a real answer to that
right.
question. And that's why OpenAI, they have those moderation teams.
Do you think they're hard coding that to say like this is the question to avoid, or is it?
I genuinely don't know how they are solving it. My
Yeah,
guess is that they're taking that original question, encoding it, and then looking for similar questions coming in that are similar to that encoding, and then
yeah,
kicking back and saying, hey, like this violates our moderation. So it's kind of like using ChatGPT to moderate itself. It's like, hey, ChatGPT, does this question violate any of these ethics or standards? And if it does, then it'll kick it back. That's my guess. I don't actually know how they are implementing it. That's how I would consider implementing it, at least.
so even the ethics and standards are essentially moral hard coding then,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? It's not necessarily program, but it kind of is. The program's referencing it.
Yep.
So yeah, at some point you need some foundation of truth or goodness, or however you want to phrase that. Like, hey,
Mhm.
we don't want people becoming slaves and AI helping them do that,
Right.
right? There's got to be those clear lines of good and bad, or things get ugly real fast.
Mhm. It's
That's
a classic problem of all new technology and theoretically all knowledge in the human world can be used for good or bad. So with open source models of large language models, stuff from Facebook that has come out, you're able to train your own custom models on like commodity laptop hardware to do hyper specific tasks. So you can kind of imagine what goes on in more nefarious circles. And one of my predictions is saying like, and maybe something that's not being talked about enough is I would think there's going to be a larger jump in domestic terrorism in the next 3 to 5 years
oh,
because
interesting.
you're going to have these open source models that don't have moderation on top of them where people could go to the dark web, download data sets on bomb making or how to 3D print your own weapons and stuff. Take that data, fine tune open source large language model on it, and then they could start asking questions of it like, oh, okay, like I prepared XYZ, but here's a photo of what I'm working on. What's wrong with it? Like, why isn't this bomb working the way that I want it to? And then have
Yeah,
it actually figure that out and tell you why. So I think as the next few years progress, as we see more mental health issues coming out, as people struggle with the economy and their living situation and the imbalance of wealth, whether or not you agree with any of that, I don't think is relevant. It's just it's a reality to some people. And I think that's all that matters is some people are experiencing reality in this way. And
sure.
now they have other tools that will allow them to take out their vengeance. So my actual prediction is you might see a rise of domestic terrorism and domestic violence in the next few years.
I hope you're wrong.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Although it does remind me of I think it was a middle schooler who got interviewed by the Department of Homeland Security because he built a nuclear reactor for his science fair, like a model, not a working
Mhm.
one. And once they saw it, they're like, this is like really, really accurate. How did you learn how to do this? And he was like, I just Googled it. And so there is some truth absolutely to what you're saying. That is definitely why the alignment problem, I think, matters. So, is there anything you believe humans can do that AI will never be able to do? Is there something
Mm.
that makes us unique?
I mean, I still think from the creative aspect, there's so much going on that we don't even fully understand. And I don't believe AI in its current iteration and likely in the future will be able to replicate. Just in the way that we were talking about how ChatGPT and large language models, they don't actually have any intelligence. They're just really, really good pattern generators, sort of
Mhm.
thing. So I think you take that to a larger extreme and think about how natural human creativity process works and how we come up with these ideas and we implement them in the real world. I think AI may be able to model how we do that, and it may be able to do so in a pretty effective way. But I don't actually believe that it'll be capable of replicating that process. And I think if you have more energetic or spiritual mindset on top of that as well, I think it's even more challenging for AI to understand that and then be able to replicate it. So if you think about religion or even spirituality within the creative process, like when someone has this seed of an idea, like where did that seed come from? How was it planted? How was it nurtured? Where did that come from? Where was the ephemeral nature of it? How did you then take that and nurture that idea and then bring it to fruition in the real world? That's what I mean.
I struggle with exactly where that's going to end up. I know an individual who is in the marketing world, and he has developed software that essentially takes your entire marketing campaign and develops it from a few prompts. Now he's got a
Mhm.
whole back end to take and make it emotionally relevant and connect it to people and all these things that we understand about human nature. So again, you can use it for good or evil, like you said before, understanding how people's minds work and how to manipulate them or influence them has factors. But he's put this together and he says, take some 10 minutes, whatever, to get this thing started. And it spits out everything: landing
Mhm.
pages, emails, headlines, the whole deal. Everywhere where he's deployed it, it's 100% beats the control. It's
Mhm.
never lost.
Mhm.
And so you say, okay, well, that's pretty darn creative. I can think of another example of where there was a big picture contest. Take a photo, submit it. It was over 400,000 submissions. And the winner, when he received the award, was like, I can't accept this. I didn't actually take this picture. This is totally AI generated.
Mhm.
And so these are professional photographers in a world like class rating, looking at all these pictures and saying, no, this is the best picture ever a human's ever taken out of these 400,000, right?
Mhm.
And they couldn't tell that that wasn't real. that it
Mhm.
was manufactured by AI. And so that line of what can we and can't we do is blurry for me.
I think though the actual end product was AI generated, there was still a human in the loop. It wasn't that AI had this idea of let's optimize our marketing and our landing pages. Like there had to
Right.
be a human taking that seed of an idea and bringing it to fruition. And in the photo example, someone had to write the prompt and then someone had to
Sure.
submit it to the contest. So there's still, and the human had to have an idea to say, oh, here's this contest. I wonder if I can use AI and like win this thing.
I would say the individual has a free will, a consciousness to come up with these goals. Essentially, a human can set its own goals,
Hmm.
whether you call it teleology, from the philosophical understanding that we have the ability to look at the world and say, okay, this is what I want to accomplish. The AI can't, it's just waiting for an input. What does ChatGPT do if nobody talks to it? Well, it does nothing.
Hmm.
But you and I don't have that ability to just do nothing. There's something always going on. And so I would separate the two from
Hmm.
the goal that I can create and understand this goal, but the actual creativity of the creative process can almost entirely be handed off once the goal is generated.
That makes sense, and I partially agree with that explanation. I guess the way I look at it is in both of those cases, the AI was the paintbrush, but it wasn't the artist. It was the tool that facilitated it, and it may have appeared to have done the creation, but it in the end, in both cases, it was just a pattern generator.
I think it's a little more than a paintbrush because you can put a paintbrush in my hand, it would come up with junk. But if you gave me an AI, it would be a whole lot better. So, but no, I really appreciate the honest conversation. These are some really world challenging topics, difficult things that people are trying to wrap us, of course. And so I love that we can come here and have a chat. Maybe we don't disagree on everything, but we can figure it out together. And we're both curious and open to learning. And, like you've said several times, the growth mindset. I think that's what's really crucial in these discussions. So I appreciate that you have a growth mindset, that we can have these discussions, sometimes agree, sometimes disagree, but both keep learning and proven. And hopefully everybody listening to this is taken from that as well. So anything that you want to summarize with, Adrian, or anything I should have asked, maybe that I haven't, that you think would be relevant here?
Honestly, the question that I feel like you should have asked is, "Where can I buy your book?"
Well, the easiest place is going to be at briantruly.com. We'll have links to buy it at Amazon. We have it up for pre-release and Barnes& Noble and other places we're putting it up. So I'll have my name published, BRYANTRILLI.com, and you'll be able to get all the information there.
Man, I'm looking forward to reading it.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care.